Welcome to Smart Route, the podcast by CallTrackingMetrics, where you'll hear stories from businesses at the intersection of marketing, customer experience, and sales. We're sitting down with business leaders and industry experts to dive deep into the path they took to find success. Here's your host, Courtney Tyson.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to episode 22 of Smart Route, which is ironically also our very last episode of 2022. Thank you for listening in. I am your host and strategic partnership manager at CallTrackingMetrics, Courtney Tyson. As marketers reflect on 2022 and look ahead to 2023, we wanted to take some time to discuss the MarTech trends to be on the lookout for in 2023. And so we've invited our CallTrackingMetrics partner, Daniel Alvarado, VP of Technology at White Shark Media, to lead us through the discussion. Daniel is an expert at helping organizations use technology to create meaningful experiences, simplify complex tasks, and generate value for their clients. Welcome, Daniel, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm super excited, extremely happy to be here and have this conversation. There's so much to talk about, so definitely looking forward to what we'll be covering.
Yes, this is going to be a really fun call. And so Daniel has spent 8 years or more, I believe, in the MarTech industry. So he is an expert, which is why we've invited him today. But before we get started, Daniel, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey to becoming VP of technology at White Shark Media?
Of course. I actually started in the digital marketing space about 10 years ago. So that is correct. It's a little over 8. And the great thing for me has been working on marketing itself through a few different angles, right? And seeing things through different lenses. I've been an account manager myself, so I've actually managed campaigns for clients. As you may or may not know, White Shark Media is a digital advertising agency. So I was on the front lines speaking to customers, understanding their needs, being able to put together strategies for their paid marketing campaigns and utilizing tracking as a result of that. I've also been a team leader. I was a team leader for about a couple of years. And then afterwards, I was sought upon to do a director of marketing, where I was leading a team overseeing multi-channel efforts, which is actually one of the things that we'll discuss today, because multi-channel efforts have been going on for a while, but obviously they become more important as time goes by. So that's a little bit of where I was for a bit in terms of some of the highlights. I've obviously managed, close to $500,000 a month in advertising spent before, both through internal marketing as well as through some of our clients that we've actually worked with. I am very technically savvy. I love it. That's my hobby, as you can probably tell from the title. So I love tracking. I love everything that has to do with like nerdy things like that, such as implementing the right pixels, being very picky about how we implement those tags, adding as much information as possible to what we are able to track and measure. And I'm super big on numbers. So that's a little bit about my profile. And in terms of what I'm doing today, I'm currently overseeing a team of 15 people. Which is just a combination of engineers, designers, and product managers. As we're working on, one of our new sub products, which is called AdClicks, and that's a reporting engine that we are using both internally and offering as a product. So that's a little bit about me, and we'll get to cover a few more topics.
Well, very nice. Thanks for sharing. You've had quite the journey, and you've have had such an opportunity to wear so many hats, which is really cool. So congratulations on all of your success and getting to where you are today. It's interesting to think about. You've spent your career in this industry, right? So you've seen MarTech trends evolve tremendously throughout the past decade. And 2022 was interesting, right? It brought the introduction of new data privacy laws and best practices, sunsetting of Google Analytics. We saw omni-channel and social media marketing kind of come to the forefront again, right? We're seeing new concepts such as connected TV, AI, and conversational intelligence brought to the table. There's just been a lot going on this year and a lot of different things that marketers are talking about in regards to MarTech trends. So let's dive into some and talk a little bit more about what we're seeing. Let's get started and discuss social platforms. So Daniel, can you tell us a little bit more about what platforms out there are gaining relevance, and how will we likely start to use our current popular platforms in new ways too?
Absolutely. Well, I think the most popular platforms are no surprise the number one, in my opinion, and also based on just the research that's conducted across the industries. I've been reading a few articles, and we still have Facebook as the number one, very closely followed by YouTube, which is in general, even though it's not exactly social, but it is considered within that bucket. So we still have YouTube around that. We also have Instagram, which is very closely related to Facebook, but it's still on a separate bucket, and they have their own different tools and their own different things. Um, and then I think one that's actually particularly interesting that's grabbing a lot of traction nowadays is TikTok. There's still some debate on whether or not it's going to be banned in the U.S. or not, but as of right now, it's still very much up and running, and there's a lot of activity happening through TikTok, and it's actually one of the ones that, in my opinion, um, is one that if you're not in there already, you probably should. There's a lot of value to be gained from that. It's especially depending on the audience that you're targeting. So if you're in retail and if you're in the world of being able to sell products to your end customers, that's a pretty good age range to go after in terms of what TikTok can offer. I think there's a few different ways that you can approach social, but when people use it, they are looking to engage with obviously their peers and their friends and everything along those lines. But it's also turned differently now. So I remember before it was all about connecting with friends and sharing, images, sharing your own experiences, but it's also now turned into actually following brands and researching your products before. So I think that social proof nowadays is a huge thing. So if you have a good following on social media, if you have people that are talking about you, and this is also very intertwined with like influencers, right? Both at the big influence in terms of also um, maybe smaller micro influencers in specific niches that you find attractive to your brand. I think that's what's basically taking a lot of traction nowadays, and it's important to stay informed. It's important to understand who your customers are, what kind of specific sub segments you have within those. And I think that's how we can get creative is in doing a little bit of that influencer marketing, and then also within Instagram, for example, they now have product ads, so it's really helpful to showcase your products. And I think that one is maybe the one where um, you can get a little bit more ahead right now because there's a little bit less people doing that than there is maybe on Facebook. And Facebook is growing, and you have a lot of different ad formats. But the fact that within Instagram you are able to actually showcase product pricing and everything, and it's quite nicely blended into their organic posting. I think it's a really great implementation that they did, and that's why they're becoming so popular.
Hmm. Yeah, what I'm seeing too is with TikTok and LinkedIn too a little bit too, right? It all kind of ties into like social selling and even Instagram. Like for me, I know I go to Instagram to look at like product reviews, like what are influencers saying about certain products and things like that. So that's huge. We actually did a podcast this year too with a gentleman named Austin Armstrong who talks all about TikTok and using it for your business, which is really cool just to think about using it as a marketing engine. And two, just thinking about social selling, the idea of these social platforms being able to connect us with our customers. So, me being someone who and heads up at partnerships at CTM, I get a lot of sales outreach, right, from folks trying to sell me on stuff, but it also allows our commercial teams, right, to connect with their customers as well and kind of build that trust with them in a different way. So interesting to think about, those platforms that are up and coming, but how to kind of use the ones that we've already been using to our advantage as well. So thank you for that. So next, let's talk a little bit about Google and Microsoft in 20 and 23. What exciting things can we expect from Google and Microsoft next year?
Oh man, that's a hot topic right now for me, especially being an agency. I think that we have seen Google kind of do a lot of push on their side towards automation and removing some of the control that some of the agency and account managers had, and I think that's a little bit of what you can continue to see happening in 2023. Like my expectation is to see less need for technical knowledge and Google and also Microsoft also secondarily following suit as they typically would have, is that you're going to see less options, less advanced options within the campaign management. We've already seen search terms being removed in a few different scenarios, a little bit less control on bidding because we're pushing on automated bidding. And again, there's pros and cons to that. And I think what's really important and the takeaway that I would give everyone is that it's not really helpful to sit here and say, oh, it's such a shame that they're removing all of these advanced options. I think it's also about maybe thinking ahead and saying, well, let's accept that that's how the market is trending towards, and then what can we do as agencies or as business owners to take advantage of that? So now we'll have a little bit less control, but that means we also have a little bit more time back because you're not as involved in that nitty gritty, bid management, search terms review, adding more keywords, because um, Google is essentially owning all of that and managing it on your behalf. Maybe not so gracefully sometimes, I will say. We have some interesting performance changes from time to time, and um, again, the important thing here is understanding that that's the direction where things are headed, is just less
Mhm.
control, a lot more automation on that side. And it's important that we embrace it and that we find alternatives on, how do we want to best use our time, how do we want to change the narrative with our customers as well, and then ensuring that we have all the right tools in place to track the results anyways, right? So I think it starts there. If you're understanding your results, even though there's not a ton that you can optimize nowadays, that you're still, very safe and secure in terms of what you're getting from your return. But I think that's one of the key things, is just the loss of control that we're going to see with the push on performance max. We have seen that also with discovery campaign. So we are going to see Google push in that direction. And of course, my estimate would be also that Microsoft is going to follow suit in that regards. I don't know if that's something that you've also heard from other agencies that you're working with.
Um, I would say what we're seeing from other agencies is that, there's a little bit of like fear, right, with this transition to
Yeah,
GA4. This is why I love to hear your positive mindset on it, right? We got to look at the benefits, got to look at the positive side of things. And what I hear you saying is, yes, we're going to have less advanced options, and we are hearing that. And our agency partners are definitely like, what are we going to do without these less advanced options? But I love your thought process in that they're just making things easier. They're giving you some time back. And as long as you know how to report on your data and present it, you'll be good to go. Right.
exactly. And that's why you have to really think about having all of those essentials in place, right? It's making sure you have your forms being tracked. You got to make sure your calls are being tracked. You got to make sure that, and we have that in one of our other points that we'll discuss, but it's just essentially making sure that you are tracking as much as possible. And
Mhm.
making sure that you're not just focusing on that last conversion, but also all of the events that lead to that conversion as well. And that's where GA4 kind of came in as a change. I still see a
Mhm.
lot of people, even within our team, just a little bit on edge about switching over to GA4 because it's such a blank slate. You have to customize everything yourself, or at least a good chunk of it.
Mhm.
As opposed to where Universal, you have most things kind of already pre-built in. So that's a little bit of what I expect. I also think that we'll see CPCs increase a bit. Um, I think that's been the trend over the last year or so, where we have seen, especially in competitive industries that have picked up after COVID. We have seen
Mhm.
an increase in the cost per click. So I do expect CPCs to continue to rise a bit and just get more competitive. So you got to make sure that you're not only doing search, but that you're also finding other campaign types that can complement your search efforts. Whether that's, again, if you're in retail, making sure that you have your right shopping campaigns, or if you're doing a performance max, of course, that you have your feeds in place. Make sure that you're doing display, that you're doing retargeting. There's a lot of different options that you have, so that overall you're not too fixed on what your search CPC is, but maybe overall what is your total, right? And how are you seeing things holistically? So I think that's a
Mhm.
little bit of what we'll also see on that side. And then a key thing that I also think it's, again, within that same realm, is I also see a push on making sure that we are tracking things, not only again on the last conversion, but all of those events that lead to that conversion. So you understand your conversion paths quite well, in that you are attributing things not only to the individual platform, whether that's Google, whether that's Microsoft, but just across the board. So I think that's
Gotcha.
what we're going to see in general.
Okay. And I would say too, I think when we talk about change and fear with the change, right? I always like to say, lean on your vendors, lean on your partners, lean on your clients, anyone you can learn from. Gather as much information as you can and run with it. I bring that up because here at CTM, we're definitely prepared to help our customers with the transition to GA4. We've been working to build and enhance that integration all year, our integration with ads as well. And we've made some really great strides in just making automation easier than ever, especially with the introduction of like our global settings and triggers. So lean on those resources you have out there to learn more about how you can kind of more smoothly go through that transition.
Absolutely.
As we're on the topic of data, let's talk a little bit more about data privacy. So, a lot more restrictions are being released, and marketers really need to discuss this and how it impacts the way that they're doing their jobs. So, tell us a little more about what marketers are in for next year when it comes to data privacy.
Yep, I think we'll see just a push on removing cookies. At the end of the day, I think if I remember a couple years ago, there was no issues with cookies. Then we slowly started to see the introduction of permissions to track that information. And then I think eventually we're just going to see more and more restrictions along those lines. So um, I think it's also relevant to keep in mind, how can you, what does that mean for you as an advertiser? So if you have a lot less of those cookies being accepted, what are your workarounds that you can implement as a result of that? Because I think that's you have to think of how does that affect your tracking? How does that affect the way that you measure your results? And that's a little bit of what I think it's really important, because it's not going to get any better necessarily. I think it's just going to continue to um, constrict further. Um,
Hmm.
and it's going to be super important to have the right tools in place, and also the right mindset in place to say, well, now my conversions in Google have decreased, let's just say, but I know that in terms of my overall revenue that I'm driving, the revenue has stayed consistent. So maybe I'm not necessarily seeing those conversions come through from the vendor, right? I can't necessarily see those, but I know that the influx of leads is still the same. So you also have to think of the vendor in this particular case, whether that's Google, whether that's Microsoft. That's only one part of the story, and you still have to be um, mindful of what you're seeing within your CRMs, mindful of what you're seeing in terms of your feedback from the sales teams, and just rely on your own data as well, as opposed to only relying on what you're able to see through third-party tracking tools. Because again, there's a little bit of that happening. And I'm curious, what are you guys doing um, to work around that? Like, are you guys preparing any changes in the way that you manage those permissions and the way that you manage cookies, cookie duration, anything along those lines?
That's a great question. So to my knowledge, it's not necessarily going to affect us directly, right? And the
Okay.
information that we're able to pull in right now. With that said, we did have one of our partners on the podcast earlier this year. Her name's Nava Hopkins, and she echoed just exactly what you had said in terms of, making sure that we're giving the let's say the advice around making sure that marketers know they have to think of new ways to get to know their customers and get to know who they are and what they want. And so you talked a lot about relying on that data from CRMs, from sales teams, just really finding new ways to learn more about who their customers and what their customers are. So that's kind of what we've ran with this year in terms of
Yeah.
talking about the first party cookies. Do you happen to know when they're planning on going away?
They did push the end of third-party cookies again. So now it's been pushed from
Oh, it's
2023
okay.
into 2024. So at least within the year, I think we'll be fine. But it's important that you take it as a transitional year, And we all start thinking of what would we do then without those if that was the case. But at least for now, it's been pushed until the end of 2024. So we're talking about maybe second semester of 2024.
Gotcha. Okay. While we're on the topic of data privacy, I wanted to bring up too, we're seeing a lot of this at CallTrackingMetrics in terms of regulations that the government is putting on the telecommunications industry. So what we've been doing is working all year to help our customers comply with those new US regulatory guidelines around, which you've probably heard about, sort of stir shaken and A to P. So these are regulations that are going to help fight spam calls and text messages and do away with those number spoofing calls that you get, right? So
Yeah.
those are the sorts of things that we're working on our end to ensure, that we're complying, our customers are complying, and they're still able to communicate with their customers via phone, via text successfully.
Good. And I'm
So,
happy to hear that you guys are always on top of that because there's so many different regulations that you probably have to deal with, right?
and they're always changing, and so it's the government who's putting these in place, right? The FCC specifically, and then they have to communicate to all of the carriers, right? And then they all have their ways of doing things. So it's definitely been a consistently flowing process of just changes coming down the pipe. So our team has done a really fantastic job of just helping our clients stay up to speed with what's going on and ensuring that there's no interruption in service and that they're complying. So.
Good.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. So, let's see. Let's move on to the next trend we have on our list here. And I should say, like, it was actually really hard for us to pinpoint which trends to discuss, right? Because there is so much going on. But this one's interesting, and I think I just kind of talked about, calls and texts and all of that. Let's talk a little bit more about omni-channel marketing. Um, it's important as ever. Let's touch on it. I know that you had specifically wanted to talk about the importance of integrations and reporting. So I guess let's start there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, what are we, first of all, let's just clarify, right? So, what are we saying within omni-channel marketing is just ensuring that we are not relying just on search, that we're not relying just on social, but rather that we're doing a holistic approach through all the different avenues that are possible and that are also relevant to our customers. That's, I think, important, of course. More is not necessarily better, but you do have to understand where your customers spend their time, what kind of content do they view, what kind of applications do they use, and then once you understand that, you can define your plan and say, well, I'm going to do a combination of search, a little bit of display, some social media, some video ads, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's what's key. And so
Hmm.
what happens as a result of that? As a result of that, you now need to be able to combine the different spend numbers, the different metrics from all of those into one same place in order to be able to make decisions. Because one of the mistakes that I see people make all the time is to pause campaigns on specific vendor because the ROI is not there, and that's super super common. And so what can you do about that? Is that wrong? No, not necessarily. But you have to remember that the data that you get, let's just say, for example, from your Instagram campaign, that's only one part of the puzzle. You have to look at everything at once. And it is important to understand that you are not able to drive only bottom of the funnel leads. That's not how it works. So you have to make sure that if you want more bottom of the funnel, you do still have to feed the top, right? In order to make sure that more of those leads come through and that they can progress through all of your different marketing approaches and all of your engagements. So I think it's important to understand that, hey, okay, well, I have my social ads and they have an ROI that is negative, and then I have my search campaign that's got a positive ROI, and then I have my video campaigns, which is kind of in the middle. But overall, how am I doing as a business? Am I actually driving overall the results that I want? And therefore, if we are in a good place. And what's happening is that maybe you're looking at social as just a driver for revenue, but that might not be the case. But it is helping you establish social proof. It is helping you get people to sign up for your newsletters. It is helping you get more subscribers that you can then market to in different other places. It's helping you get more people that you can then retarget. So if you look at
Hmm.
only that piece of the puzzle, it's very easy for you to sometimes make the mistake of assuming that it's not working. So I think my takeaway for everyone when it comes to omnichannel is just to make sure that you're looking at each specific network has an objective and you have to have that clear, and then also seeing how is that affecting your overarching efforts and what's the ROI that you're getting overall, right, or your return on ad
Hmm.
spend as a whole. So I think
Yeah,
that's key. And there's so many different tools out there to help you do that. There's different reporting tools out there. Call Tracking Metrics also makes sure, I think you have integrations with all of the key vendors such as Google, Microsoft, and things like that. So you have to have something in place to help you understand that. But that's the key takeaway for me. It's just make sure that you know where to put the money, but also don't look at them as individuals. Look at it as a holistic approach as well, because that's
I
what it
love that.
is.
And I love how you explain it as a puzzle, and each channel, right, each strategy, whatever, right, it all adds to the puzzle and tells the whole story once it's put together. And we talk a lot about omni-channel at CTM too, because the way I look at it is I'm not a marketer, right? But the way I look at it is with omni-channel marketing, you're reaching your customers, right, in the way in which they want to engage with you. Like I had just said, I like to go to Instagram and look at reviews from influencers, right? And then I might go to the company's websites. Like that's how I prefer to interact, whereas someone else might just prefer to pick up the phone, or they might prefer to go to a different site to look at reviews, right? So it's good to just make sure you're communicating with your customers in the way they want to be communicated with. And that's what's, we push too, is that our platform allows you to collect those calls, chats, texts, forms, fills to make sure you're not missing any of those pieces of communication once they do take that step to engage with you.
Yeah, and that's actually super important. And Call Track Metrics has allowed White Shark to get a lot of those insights and provide a lot of value to our customers as well. So, um, and I think speaking on general results and tracking, I think that a part of that omni-channel, it's also looking into multi-touch attribution as well. That continues to be something that's really important. Um, and then also in terms of you might see a spike in people trying to find attribution software. That's also something that's becoming increasingly popular,
Hmm.
which is now the thing of having like one pixel to like track the conversions from different vendors as well. You'll see a bit of a pickup on that as well. There's a few different applications that do that, and I've seen that across the board, so that you not only rely on the data from the vendor, but of course, again, thread carefully, because you have to still listen to the vendor's information, because they do, for example, with Google, they have smart conversions now. With Facebook, they always infer based on the user's email, and with they have their own individual data that you might not be able to get through a third party. So there's a few different things. Like I said, what's important is that you understand that it's all connected and that it's not as black and white as you may often think.
Hmm. And I love that you touch on multi-touch too. We're hearing a lot about that as well from our agency partners looking for solutions to help them understand that journey. So we're working on some things as well. We just released a multi-touch feature, and we'll continue to build on that next year. So glad that you brought that up. Helps me feel like
Yeah,
we're going in the right direction, right?
love it.
All right. So the final trend that we wanted to discuss is around conversation intelligence. So ironically, our CTM sales engineer Jason Smith, he just trained our entire company on our suite of conversation intelligence features and what we offer and how marketers could take advantage. But I'd like to get your kind of perspective on this, Daniel, and how conversational intelligence might apply to marketers in 2023.
Absolutely. So there's a couple of things around conversational intelligence, and I think it's kind of down to it's not only conversational intelligence, is also just general AI, right? So we have
Hmm.
um, two branches there. You have natural language processing, which is essentially what you're going to see from chatbots and also from different call vendors that are allowing us to like read transcripts and be able to get essentially a read on. Um, Maybe finding keywords within the calls that we have, for example, within chatbots, so that we can respond quickly to things without having to have a dedicated person. So I think what you're seeing from that or spawn from that is just time savings, because I don't have to have a dedicated person on a live chat, for example, if we talk about chatbots, because that's also within that bracket of conversational intelligence, it's like I don't have to invest in as much staff, for example, to be responding to those messages. And we've actually seen an increase in the number of conversational interactions, or interactions that are handled by a conversational agent like that, by as much as 250% since the start of the pandemic. And this is more of a global event. And you see that everywhere now. Banks have their chatbots. Um, there's a lot of different platforms out there that are already doing it, and it's also been a boom in terms of just how many vendors you have around that. So again, it's just time savings. It's also because it's good for the customers because they can get an immediate answer as opposed to being on the queue. So you also have to think about
Mhm.
customer satisfaction as a result of that conversational intelligence. The more that customers interact with that, the more the machine learns also about what's a positive outcome, what's not a positive outcome. And so I think that those are maybe the three components. It's just time savings, it's satisfaction for the customer, and also again just continuously improving based on what you're able to find. That's within the chatbot part. One thing that I
Mhm.
also think it's super important within the actual conversations or the calls, for example. um, I think it's sentiment analysis. I think it's extremely important that we are now able to get machines to analyze a call, listen to it, and then give us our take, or give us their take on how that customer is feeling within that call. Were they able to find what they were looking for? Was the issue that they had resolved? And a lot of those you can infer directly from that same intelligence or that same technology. And I'm not really sure. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on how you guys are doing it. But what I see from a marketer standpoint is that you can quickly tell whether or not, out of so many hundreds of calls, how many of those had a positive outcome by just essentially looking through the transcripts, and then maybe putting in some rules. And I think that's what would be super helpful, because we used to have to listen to calls all the time. And
Mhm.
we still do, to provide our customers with like some input. And it's like, hey, we noticed this. We noticed that maybe we could have maybe picked up the phone a little bit faster, or we noticed that we could have been a little bit more friendly, or hey, this was a very qualified lead, but it didn't close because of XYZ. So we used to provide a lot of that to our customers, and we had to spend, a good deal of time depending on the size of the customer and how many calls they had. So now we can save
Mhm.
time on that by getting some of those conclusions from tools such as, CTM in this case, and other tools out there as well.
Yeah, yeah. So I can talk a little bit more on what we're doing, which definitely echoes everything that you just said. So specifically, we have a keyword spotting tool that when transcriptions is enabled, it helps our clients to spot, identify, and then take action on keywords and sentiment within their customers' conversations automatically, which is really cool, right? So our system spots a keyword that indicates a customer is unhappy, then we can go ahead and send that organization a notification. Your agent had a call with an unhappy customer, right? Or maybe someone can barge into the call and help that agent out. But two, just thinking about call and lead scoring for marketers is huge too. So the tools that we have to be able to help you maybe automatically score a call based on things we've picked up, whether it be the sentiment or keywords spoken maybe about a product or their intent to buy, helps marketers to automatically score calls, which then helps you kind of keep data clean because we're also helping you to determine, well, which of those are you sending as conversions to ads, for example, right? So those are ways in which you can think about it.
I love it. And I also love that you mentioned that it's not only about being able to make some conclusions based on the data, but I'm also reading from what you're saying is that you have the ability to then create some automations as a result of that. So if you are able to do that, then that's obviously a double time saver, which I think it's absolutely amazing.
Agreed. Agreed. And as we talked about before, I mean, marketers need new ways to collect data around their customers. And well, listening to those recordings and pulling out words and phrases, certainly helps to help
Yeah.
you better
I
understand your customers,
Yeah,
right?
I could tell you, for example, that again, depending on what your service is, you also want to use conversational intelligence, for example, to pick up on trends of what are customers asking for nowadays, so you can use that to also create your own content. So it's not only about maybe telling whether the call was good or not, but it's also, okay, well, what competitors are they mentioning, what kind of activities are they saying? Like if you're offering, for example, if you're on retail and you're offering, for example, clothing, okay, well, what kind of clothing are customers asking for? If we're talking about, for example, if you're a travel agency or something along those lines, maybe you want to know what are the main activities that people are asking about. So there's so much that you can use from that, which again, talked about first party data and what you can use. You can turn that into then marketing campaigns that are tailored around those things as well. So there's also that component of being able to create content from what your customers are saying as well, which I think is extremely important.
Yeah, that's a great point as well. So thanks for bringing that up. So that was 5 trends. We successfully covered 5 trends. 2023 is really going to keep marketers on their feet. um, Daniel, before we wrap up here, is there anything that you would like to add or plug?
Yes. In fact, as I mentioned during the intro, one of the things that I'm currently spearheading is a project to scale up and get into the market of reporting tools. So we have our platform called AdClicks, and you can find more about AdClicks at adclicks.app. It is a multi-channel, all-in-one, automated white label, and it's super easy to use. That was our bet. It's just making sure that it was um, extremely easy for people to create the reports, to share them with their clients, and our approach was to make it as pretty as possible so that you can wow your customers. Because at the end of the day, the reports are for your customers, and so that's kind of the focus in the approach. So to learn more about AdClicks, go to adclicks.app.
Thanks, Daniel. And I can say firsthand, I have seen AdClicks. It's a beautiful platform. It's super easy to use. I've seen multiple demos at this point, actually, and the reports that it creates for marketers are just they're great. They're pretty to look at, right? But they allow you to very easily digest the information that obviously they're trying to present, right? So you guys done a really great job over there, and congratulations. And we certainly look forward to continuing to share ad clicks with our partners and with our customers as well.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for the kind words. I do appreciate that from the bottom of my heart.
Of course, of course. This was so great. And just to recap, today we talked about social platforms, which are up and coming, as well as how to adjust to the existing platforms we're used to. We talked about changes to be expected from Google, Microsoft, the rise of data privacy and regulations. We talked about omni-channel marketing, and lastly, conversational intelligence. So, Daniel, I want to thank you again for being here and sharing your expertise with us. We really appreciate it, and we really appreciate White Shark's partnership as well.
Thank you again, Courtney, for inviting me. It has been a pleasure. I hope to join, a couple more of these in the future, and it was absolutely great. Look forward to a very successful 2023 for all of you marketers listening to us today, and then for you guys as well.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll definitely, we'd love to have you back. And just want to thank you, our listeners, too, for your support throughout 2022 as well. We definitely look forward to bringing you more compelling content in 2023. Happy holidays, everyone. That's a wrap. Thank you.